It began on a forgotten trade hub named Varos 3, floating quietly on the far edge of the Celestar sector. A lonely metal station where the stars moved slow and the silence felt heavier than normal space. And for weeks strange things started happening, small at first, easy to ignore, like the drifting stars around the station flickering like dying candles, satellites going offline one by one, patrol ships vanishing without sending even a single distress call, and workers whispering about strange echoes moving through the metal walls at night, echoes that didn't sound mechanical or natural, but something cold, something distant, something alive, and no one took it seriously until one night the sky above Varos 3 tore open with a violent white flash so bright it blinded the workers through reinforced glass, and a giant rift formed above the station. A wound in space glowing at the edges but pure darkness inside, the kind of darkness that swallows light instead of hiding within it. And something moved inside that darkness, something long, something slow, something hungry, and the Varos Council panicked, rushing through corridors, shouting commands, trying to contact nearby fleets, but every channel turned to static as if the rift was swallowing signals before they could escape. And fear took over. So much fear that someone in the command room suggested activating the old emergency network, the one no one had used in centuries, hidden behind layers of dust and warnings. And in their shaking, frantic panic someone entered the wrong code, sending the SOS not to neighboring empires, not to local fleets, but to an ancient frequency belonging to one species only, humanity, the Deathworlders, the most feared beings in galactic history, a species famous not for mercy but for surviving worlds that should have killed them, for building weapons that scared entire armadas, and when the mistake was realized it was already too late. The signal had launched into the deep void, racing through forgotten channels, reaching places Varos 3 never imagined existed anymore, and the workers prayed very quietly, because deep in their hearts they knew humanity didn't always send rescue when danger appeared. Sometimes they sent something else, something darker, something built to end threats before they grew worse, and as hours passed the rift grew wider, the shadows inside it moved faster, crawling like claws along the edges of space, and the workers felt fear coil inside their chests with every vibration of the station, every flicker of the lights, every strange cold breath of air coming from vents that shouldn't be cold, until 3 nights after the SOS was sent the stars outside Varos 3 vanished completely as an enormous shadow covered them. A shape bigger than any ship known to the Celestar sector, blocking entire constellations, silent and smooth and black like a piece of the night sky had been carved away and dropped toward the station, and every worker pressed against the windows, their hearts pounding, their breath shaking, because the ship didn't glow, didn't roar, didn't pulse with normal energy. It simply existed, swallowing light, drifting forward without thrusters, covered in strange glowing symbols that looked alive. And in that moment everyone on Varos 3 understood their fear was real. Their mistake was real, and humanity had heard the call, but they had not sent aid. They had sent a ship no alien should ever see. The moment the massive dark ship appeared above Varos 3, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath, and inside the station fear spread like cold smoke because everyone knew the old stories whispered in training halls and late-night gatherings, stories about humanity, the Deathworlders, about how they once walked among the stars like storms wearing human skin, how they fought wars no one else dared to join, how their ships vanished into the void centuries ago after a final battle no one survived except them. And now, as the old frequency echoed through space, leaders across different empires felt a chill when their ancient sensors whispered the truth. Someone had triggered the Deathworld code. Someone had called for help from a species that responded only to crises big enough to break planets. And every council chamber in nearby sectors grew tense with fear as officials argued. Who called them? Why now? What if they think we did it on purpose? What if they think it's a trap? But all arguments stopped when the quiet realization spread that the humans did not answer for politics or alliances. They answered only when something dangerous enough to threaten entire civilizations appeared, and if they were coming now, it meant something worse than the rift was on the way. Meanwhile on Varos 3 the workers stood shaking, watching the dark ship hover silently above them like a living nightmare, its hull pulsing with a slow glow that felt like a heartbeat from something not mechanical but ancient and aware, and the workers could feel it watching them even though it had no windows, as if the ship itself was studying the station, judging it, deciding whether it was worth saving or wiping clean, and the council tried desperately to control the panic, but even they trembled because when the SOS was sent by mistake, they had hoped no one would hear. They had prayed the Deathworlders were extinct or sleeping or too far away to care. But now it was clear that humanity had not disappeared. They had only become silent, hiding their weapons in shadows no one could reach, and now they were awake again. Across the galaxy, rumors spread faster than light. Old captains whispered that they once saw a similar ship centuries ago during the Rift War. A war so brutal that empires erased it from official records, and young officers panicked because the thought of Deathworlders returning meant the universe was about to face something it was not prepared for. And back on Varos, the workers kept staring as the giant vessel slowly rotated, its hull shifting like dark water under moonlight, symbols glowing brighter as if they were reading the rift, and one worker whispered with shaking lips, "If this is their rescue ship, what do they send when they're angry?" But no one answered, no one could, because deeper inside their hearts the truth struck them all at once. They had not only called the most feared species in the galaxy, they had accidentally awakened the one enemy even the Deathworlders once feared, and the workers felt it in their bones that this ship above them had not come to rescue. It had come to face something ancient, something returning, something hungry, and something that the galaxy had hoped to never see again. The shadow covering Varos 3 grew heavier as the Deathworlder ship lowered closer, its dark hull humming with a vibration that felt alive, like a beast waking from centuries of sleep, and the workers stood frozen, their hearts thumping painfully as the air turned cold, the lights flickered, and even the station's metal structure groaned under the pressure of something far beyond normal technology. And then, slowly, a single panel on the underside of the ship opened, not with noise or light, but with a quiet glow that spread across the hull like blue fire trapped inside glass, and from that opening a small, sharp beam of pale energy touched the ground, not burning it, not damaging it, but scanning it, reading it, tasting it, and the workers backed away in fear because they had never seen anything like it. And then, through that beam, a figure appeared, slowly forming out of thin air, tall, silent, covered in a suit made from a metal that moved like liquid shadows, his steps making no sound as he touched the ground of Varos 3 for the first time, and the entire colony went completely silent because a real human now stood among them. Not the soft humans from old stories, but the Deathworld kind, the ones who survived conditions that would kill every other species instantly. And his presence alone felt heavy, powerful, dangerous, like the gravity around him had thickened, and he didn't look around with curiosity or fear but with the cold, sharp eyes of someone who had already seen too many horrors in life, as if nothing on this station could surprise him anymore. He glanced at the rift in the sky, then at the trembling workers, then at the flickering lights above them, and his expression didn't change once, only hardened as if confirming a terrible truth he already suspected. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried a depth that made the colony feel exposed. "Who opened the tier?" And the workers looked at each other helplessly because they had no answer that made sense. And the council tried explaining the flickering stars, the lost satellites, the strange echoes, the vanished patrol ships, the sudden rift, and the accidental SOS. Their words stumbling over each other, and the human listened without blinking, his jaw tightening slightly, his eyes narrowing as the rift pulsed behind him like a heartbeat. And when they finished explaining, he closed his eyes slowly as if feeling the space around them, the air, the ground, and then he whispered something that made the colony's blood run cold. "You should not have called anyone. Not because you didn't need help, but because you needed help humanity didn't want to give." And the workers felt a weight crash down on their hearts as he stepped past them, walking toward the rift with sure, steady steps, each movement filled with purpose and memory. And when he knelt to touch the ground beneath the tier, a thin ripple of blue energy spread from his fingers, crawling across metal, stone, and air, and the workers watched the ripples distort unnaturally as they reached the rift's edge, bending and twisting like they were touching something that didn't belong to this universe. And the human's eyes darkened with recognition, a deep sadness mixed with anger flashing through them for a moment before he stood and turned back to the terrified colony, his face now carrying a shadow of something ancient and painful. And he said in a voice that felt like a funeral bell, "This is not a natural tear. It is a door, and something ancient has already walked through it." And the fear that spread through Varos 3 in that moment was cold and absolute because the workers realized the truth that they had tried to avoid since the rift appeared. The Deathworlders had not come because they were sent. They had come because something far worse had answered the call first. The moment the human uttered those chilling words, a cold silence settled over Varos 3, the kind of silence that sinks deep into the bones and makes every breath feel heavy. And the workers stared at him with wide, shaken eyes because they could tell he wasn't speaking from guesswork or fear but from experience. Memories carved into him like scars. And as he stepped closer to the rift, the light from the tear reflected across his dark armor, revealing faint scratches, burns, and symbols that hinted at battles fought in places no map had ever recorded, and the workers could almost feel the weight of those invisible wars hanging around him like a ghost. He studied the pulsing tear with slow, controlled breaths, his eyes narrowing as the edges of the rift twisted unnaturally like something inside was pushing outward, and he raised one hand, letting a wave of blue light flow from his palm across the air, the ground, the broken energy lines of the station, and the energy distorted again, bending away from the rift as if refusing to touch whatever was inside, and the human's expression hardened with a deep old anger, the kind that grows only after losing too much, and he turned back to the trembling crowd, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through fear. Whatever came through this tear, it studied you first. And his words hit the workers like a blow, some stumbling back, some covering their mouths, because the idea that something ancient had been watching them, learning from them, moving unseen inside their station made their hearts twist in panic. The commander stepped forward with shaking hands asking, "What does it want?" And the human looked at him with eyes that held centuries of nightmares, whispering, "It only wants one thing: energy, life, breath, movement." And the workers felt their skin rise with goosebumps as the human continued. "It feeds on anything alive, anything warm, anything unaware." And suddenly all the strange events, flickering stars, dying satellites, missing patrol ships, the echoes in the walls, made horrifying sense, and the workers realized those were not random malfunctions. They were signs of something feeding slowly around them, preparing itself. The human walked to a damaged section of the station where the metal looked melted in long streaks, running his fingers over it, his jaw tightening as he whispered, "They mark their territory before attacking." And the colony gasped because they had seen that melted metal for days but never understood what caused it, and the human's voice grew even darker as he said, "In my world, we call them Riftborn, a name that felt wrong on the tongue, a name that felt older than the stars," and he explained in a calm yet heart-crushing tone that the Riftborn were creatures from the folds between space, places where physics died and time twisted, beings older than empires, older than humans, older than civilization itself, and he whispered that they once nearly wiped out humanity in a forgotten war, a war so devastating that the galaxy erased every record of it to avoid waking the Riftborn again, but they survived somewhere in the dark, mutating, evolving, waiting for a door to open, and now the SOS they sent by accident had awakened more than humanity. It had awakened the Riftborn as well, calling them like a dinner bell ringing in deep space. The workers stared at the rift with tears in their eyes, imagining the creature that came through it, imagining it crawling through their station walls while they slept, imagining it watching them from the shadows as they worked, and the fear broke something inside them, but the human stood tall, his dark armor glowing faintly as he said, "Do not break yet. This is only the scout." And that single sentence sent a shock of terror through Varos 3 because if the thing that had entered their world was only a scout, then what kind of monstrous creature commanded it, what kind of nightmare species led the Riftborn, and what kind of impossible enemy had humanity once fought in silence? As if answering their thoughts, the rift pulsed again, deeper, stronger, the station vibrating violently as dust fell from the ceiling and distant metal beams creaked. And the workers backed away, some crying, some whispering prayers, and the human stepped between them and the rift, staring into the glowing tear with cold determination. And when he spoke again, his voice was steady, heavy, carrying every ounce of fear and strength inside him. "Prepare yourselves, because if the scout is here, its master will follow." The moment the human said the scout wasn't alone, a cold wave of fear spread across Varos 3, the kind of fear that crawled under the skin and sat heavy on the heart, and every worker felt the station tighten around them like the walls themselves were holding their breath. and the human moved slowly across the cracked floor, inspecting the metal that had been scorched and warped by something no one fully saw, his fingers tracing the lines as if reading a language written in destruction. And he whispered, almost to himself, "This pattern, it's the same as before." And the workers exchanged confused glances because his voice sounded tired, haunted, like he was remembering a war so old and violent that even speaking of it hurt him. And when the commander asked softly, "Before? Before what?" the human rose to his full height, eyes shadowed with memories that did not belong in any normal lifetime, and he said, "Before your empires were born, when the Riftborn hunted us." And those words struck the colony harder than any explosion could, making mothers clutch their children and older workers sink to their knees, because the idea that humanity had once been prey to something so ancient and terrifying that the galaxy erased the entire war from history, was enough to shatter their understanding of the universe. The human explained with a low, steady voice that the Riftborn didn't simply kill worlds. They hollowed them, drained them, consumed life and energy until entire planets turned to cold stones floating in space. And the only reason humanity survived was because they built weapons that broke the rules of physics, weapons so dangerous that even the Deathworlders feared using them. And after the final battle, humanity sealed away those weapons, locked their shipyards, and vanished from the galaxy to ensure the Riftborn would never find them again. And now, because of one mistaken SOS, the Riftborn had heard the call and followed it, slipping through the tier like shadows crawling through cracks. And when the commander asked with a trembling voice, "Why come here first?" the human looked at him with quiet pity, saying, "Because you are alone, weak, unprotected, a perfect place for them to feed." And that single truth crushed the colony's spirit as they realized Varos 3 had never been the true target. They were simply the first course, the soft ground before the storm. Then the rift pulsed violently, a deep, trembling thud rippling through the air like a giant heartbeat, and the human spun toward it instantly, his posture changing, body tightening, eyes turning sharp and cold like a soldier stepping onto a battlefield. And the workers felt the temperature drop again as a thin, stretched shadow moved across the glowing tier, followed by another, then another, each shape larger, darker, more fluid than the last, and the human cursed under his breath. Something none of them had ever heard a Deathworlder do, and he stepped forward, raising a strange device from his belt, slamming it into the ground, sending a wave of blue flames rolling across the metal floor in a wide circle, creating a barrier field of shimmering energy around the colony. And the workers gasped as the barrier reacted, sparking violently on one side, as if something invisible had slammed into it from the other side, and the human growled. "They're already inside." They slipped in before the tier stabilized. And panic shot through Varos 3 as workers desperately looked around, seeing only darkness, shadows, and the faint glow of the rift pulsing like a hungry eye watching them. And the human spoke again, voice low and sharp. "Listen to me. Do not split up. Do not run. They hunt fear, sound, movement." And those words made dozens of people freeze instantly, terrified even of their own breathing. And then the station lights flickered again, this time longer, darker, as if someone was dragging claws across the power lines. And in the flicker of that moment, someone screamed at the far end of the colony, a scream that ended too fast, too suddenly. And when the lights blinked back on, a worker was gone, only his dropped tool rolling slowly across the metal floor. And the human clenched his fists, whispering, "They're feeding?" And the horror of that truth spread across the station like poison, because the Riftborn weren't just arriving. They were already hunting. The scream that vanished too quickly echoed inside every mind on Varos 3 like a nightmare refusing to fade. And as the dropped tool rolled slowly across the metal floor with a hollow clink, the colony froze, breath shaking, hearts pounding, eyes wide with terror, because everyone understood in that instant that something had taken the worker. Something unseen, something silent, something impossibly fast. And the human stepped forward with a cold fury burning behind his eyes, scanning the air as if he could smell the creature through the fear thickening around them. And he whispered, "They're not hunting you for food. They're hunting you to learn." And the workers trembled because that idea was far worse, imagining invisible predators studying their movements, their panic, their weakness. And the human raised his hand slowly, motioning everyone to stay close, his voice becoming a controlled whisper. "Stay still. Stay silent. They follow vibrations. But before he finished speaking, the ground beneath their feet vibrated with a low pulse, like something large was crawling under the metal surface, moving in circles around the colony, and the workers backed away until they pressed against each other, tears forming in their eyes, while the human pressed his palm to the floor, closing his eyes for a moment, his face tightening with grim recognition as he whispered, "It's choosing its next target." And suddenly the vibration stopped completely, too completely, and a deep, unnatural silence took over the entire area. The kind of silence that feels like a breath being held before a scream, and the human's eyes snapped open as he shouted, "Move!" But the warning came a second too late, because the floor exploded upward behind the crowd as a rift-born creature shot out, its body twisting like a shadowed serpent with limbs that bent in impossible angles, its hollow head snapping toward the terrified workers, and it struck with a flicker of movement so fast only the human reacted, slamming his boot into the ground and triggering a burst of blue force from his armor that rippled outward, catching the creature mid-strike and throwing it across the station with a bone-rattling crash, and the workers stumbled back screaming, scrambling behind crates and broken walls, their hearts racing so fast they could barely breathe, and the creature rose again, its shape flickering like glitching hologram static, its limbs stretching and cracking, and its body giving off a cold darkness that made the lights flicker and hair rise on every neck, and the human moved forward with a determination that felt almost desperate, pulling out a small device from his belt, pressing it until it glowed bright blue, and he hurled it at the creature, the device exploding in a burst of shimmering energy that wrapped around the rift-born like chains of light, holding it in place, but the creature screamed. A horrible, broken sound that felt like metal tearing inside the chest, and its body twisted violently, cracking the blue chains little by little, and the human shouted, "Don't look away! If you break eye contact it moves faster." But fear was too strong. Some workers flinched, others turned their heads, and in less than a blink the creature lunged again, breaking the remaining chains and slamming onto the nearest worker, absorbing him into its shifting darkness until only dust remained on the floor, and the colony collapsed into panic, some collapsing to the ground, some clutching loved ones, some whispering prayers, and the human's voice broke with a rare anger as he slammed his wrist device, sending a shockwave that threw the creature back again. But this time the creature didn't retreat. It didn't hide. It didn't wait. It roared with a terrible hunger, and the rift overhead pulsed violently in response, and the human's face drained of color because he understood what that meant, whispering to himself, "It's calling the others." And as the rift widened further, the station walls shook, the lights flickered to near darkness, and every worker felt the truth settle into their bones. The riftborn weren't attacking anymore. They were gathering, preparing, surrounding the colony like wolves closing in on wounded prey, and the human stepped forward alone, shoulders tense, blood dripping from his cracked knuckles, eyes burning with determination and fear, whispering, "Varos 3, if we don't stop them now, there won't be anything left to save." The Riftborn's roar shook Varos 3 like a dying star, rattling loose panels, shattering weak lights, and sending waves of panic through the workers as they clung to each other with trembling hands, and the human stepped forward alone, his breathing controlled but heavy, sweat mixing with dust on his face, eyes burning with the kind of determination born only from someone who had already survived this nightmare once before, and while terror spread through the colony like wildfire, he watched the rift overhead pulse again, wider this time, brighter, as if something massive was pushing against the thin wall of reality, and he whispered, "It's not just the scouts, the hunters are coming." And those words alone crushed the remaining hope inside every person on the station. The ground rumbled deeply, a slow, hungry vibration that rose from beneath the metal like a creature crawling through veins of steel, and the human gritted his teeth, slamming a command into his wrist device, sending the nightmare ship hovering above into a violent transformation, its black hull opening like a giant mechanical flower, revealing spiraling blue weapons humming with energy so old and powerful the air shook around them, and the workers stared in shocked horror as the ship, silent until now, released a low, thunderous hum that felt alive, like it was answering a call it had been created for, and the human shouted toward it in a language none of them knew, the words sharp and desperate, and the ship responded immediately, releasing a blast of blue fire downward that struck one of the rift-born creatures trying to crawl from under the floor, burning it out of existence in a flash of light and ash. But before relief could settle over anyone, a second rift-born lunged from the shadows behind the storage units, taller than the first and shaped like a twisting mass of blades, its limbs whipping through the air with a sound like metal slicing bone. And the human spun instantly, sliding across the ground, activating a pulse shield from his armor that collided with the monster's attack, sending shockwaves across the room and knocking workers off their feet. And he shouted, "Stay behind me! Do not break formation!" But fear was too powerful. Some ran, some collapsed, some froze, and the creature sensed every vibration and turned toward the fleeing group with terrifying speed, its jagged limbs expanding like spears ready to kill. But before it could strike, the human appeared between them in a single blur of motion, taking the full force of the creature's limb on his armored shoulder, the impact sending him sliding across the floor, sparks flying as his boots dragged across metal. And the workers screamed his name even though they didn't know it, because in that moment he looked almost human, hurt, shaking, blood dripping down his arm. Yet he stood again, forcing his broken body upright as the creature charged once more. He clenched his fist around the device and let out a low, pained growl, activating a hidden command that sent a violent energy surge into the ground, creating a shock wave that erupted outward like a blue storm, flinging the creature onto a pile of collapsed crates, its limbs twisting in agony. But the human didn't smile, didn't relax, because his eyes stayed locked on the rift above, which was now splitting wider, light pouring through in long, trembling beams like fingers stretching through space, and he whispered under his breath with horror thick in his voice, "She's close, the queen, she's pushing through." And the workers felt the blood drain from their faces, tears streaming down some cheeks, because if the monstrosities they had seen were just scouts and hunters, then what sort of nightmare was the queen? And the rift pulsed again, brighter than lightning, shaking the entire station as an enormous shadow began forming inside the tear. And the human's knees nearly buckled as he forced himself to stand between the colony and the rip in space, raising his trembling arm to command the ship once more, shouting desperately for more fire, more energy, more power. But the nightmare ship groaned like metal screaming as its own systems struggled under the rising pressure, and the human whispered brokenly, "Not enough, not fast enough. She'll break through." And Varos 3 fell completely silent except for the shaking rift and the heartbeat of pure fear pounding inside every living chest, because everyone realized the same terrible truth. The real battle hadn't even started yet. The rift above Varos 3 trembled like a living wound tearing open the sky, shaking the station so violently that dust rained from the ceilings and lights flickered weakly as if begging for mercy, and every worker clung to anything they could find as fear swallowed the colony whole. Because the shadow inside the tier was growing, stretching, taking shape, a massive form with long, shifting limbs and a presence so heavy it felt like gravity was bending around it, and the human, bleeding from his arm, breathing sharply, armor cracked in several places, stood alone between the colony and that splitting rift, his hand shaking as he raised his wrist device again, forcing the nightmare ship above into one more transformation, the vessel glowing brighter and brighter until the entire sky burned blue, and the ship released a massive beam of pure energy straight into the rift, the blast so powerful it lit up the entire Celestar sector, and the shadow inside the tier screamed silently, the sound hitting the colony like a wave of crushing pressure, making workers fall to their knees, clutching their heads, tears streaming from their eyes as their bones vibrated painfully. But the rift didn't close, it didn't weaken, it didn't collapse. Instead, it widened even more, the edges splitting like broken glass under fire, and a massive claw, long as a starship wing and darker than the void itself, pushed through, each movement ripping the air apart as the human whispered hoarsely, "No, no, 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 she's too early." And he slammed his fist into the wrist device, activating emergency protocols that made the ship roar with ancient anger. But the queen's claw pierced deeper, pulling more of her form into their world, a towering silhouette covered in writhing shadows, and Varos 3 felt like it was standing beneath a god of nightmares awakening from millennia of sleep, and workers screamed, some collapsing from terror, some covering their children, others staring in shock as the human stepped directly into the path of the claw. raising both his arms despite the tremor in his body, whispering words that sounded more like a plea than a command. "Please hold just a little longer." And the ship responded with a violent burst of energy that cracked its own hull, blue flames erupting along its sides like veins bursting under pressure. And the rift flickered, the Queen's shape flickering too, as if pulled between two dimensions. But then the worst moment happened. A second shadow appeared behind her, bigger, darker, its form twisting in rage, and the human's face drained of all color, absolute horror filling his eyes as he whispered in a trembling voice that shattered the last bit of hope the colony had left. "She's not alone, another one is coming through." And the rift exploded outward in a flash so bright everything turned white. The colony thrown to the ground, the station screaming like metal dying, the ship above cracking open as its core overloaded, and in the blinding chaos the human shouted something. One last command, one last warning, or maybe one last goodbye, but no one could hear his words through the deafening roar of collapsing space, and the screen of reality tore apart, swallowing light, swallowing sound, swallowing everything until only a deep, crushing darkness remained. And in that suffocating silence, right before the world vanished from the senses of everyone on Varos 3, a single, echoing whisper drifted through the black void. A whisper that wasn't human, wasn't alive, wasn't natural, just cold, hungry, ancient. "Found you."